I'd like to introduce Sylvia Pfeiffer and also Alice Boxhall. They'll be talking to you about developing accessible web applications. Now, they both work on the Chrome browser accessibility for Google.
Thank you. I'll just stand behind the podium, I think. So, thank you. All right, so yes, as mentioned, I'm Alice Boxhall, and this is my colleague Sylvia Pfeiffer. We're both working on different accessibility-related areas in Chrome browser for Google. And we're going to talk about accessible web apps and accessible browsers. So, first of all, when we talk about accessibility, what are we talking about? Users with some kind of impairment being able to access any given website. So, the size of the problem is pretty big. So, we have a graph here. This is disabled users only in the US, deaf and hard of hearing users in the US only, not the whole world, exceed the number of internet users in Spain. Blind and low vision users in the US only exceed the number of internet users in Canada. So it's a massive number of users that need accessibility. So we've got deaf and blind and low vision here. There's also cognitive impairment, motor impairment, lots of different things that need accessibility considerations. However, we are really only going to talk today about screen reader users. Yep. Okay, so I'm just going to give a quick demo of what it's like to use a screen reader in Linux on a browser. I need Sylvie to type in her password.
Keeps locking up.
All right, so we turn it again. All right, so Orca is a screen reader that's built into Linux. And I think I muted this. Yeah.
The app @ Sylvia app VM tilde frame left contra left.
Oops. Okay. And now I've like killed it. That's very frustrating. I've backgrounded it and now I can't do anything. It's like completely dead. Linux people?
Control-C, something?
No, that's Apple C anyway. No. All right, we'll skip that demo. Sylvia is going to be doing a lot of screen reader stuff. You'll get the idea. All right, so normally, screen reading on Linux, you'd use Orca. You heard it very, very briefly there. That's what it sounds like. We're going to be using Chromebox, which is an extension for Google Chrome, which is a built-in screen reader built for the web. So Sylvia is going to take over now and give you some information on how to build an accessible web app.
Funny with this thing about Orca, because it worked really nicely before. It's actually built into the menu, so if you go to accessibility in the menu, you can actually turn it on and work with it. I recommend everyone to give it a shot. So we'll be talking about how to make web apps accessible. That means that you as a web developer, you're creating a new application on the web, a website, or actually something interactive. In particular, the interactive stuff is actually a bit more challenging to make accessible, so we'll talk about how to make that accessible. Alice is then going to take over and dig a bit deeper into the internals, into the innards of what's actually happening behind the scenes in a browser. How does a browser map it to the underlying accessibility technology, and how does the browser hand over information to the screen reader? So that's some deep code digging that we're going to do. We'll keep the best for last. So for now, we'll stay with on the higher level web applications. And we'll have a little outlook as to what's happening right now with respect to accessibility at the W3C. So how to make your web apps accessible. Say that as a German. So here we've got a form. And I'm going to turn on, we've already got Chromebox turned on, very nice. I'm using Chromebox, which is a plugin on your desktop, a plugin screen reader, but if you run Chrome OS, it will be the platform accessibility screen reader. So on Chrome OS, it is the screen reader that you're using.
Example, labeling, low-hanging fruit,
Maybe I don't need to say anything anymore. The screen reader will do it all for me.
Edit text.
Did that tell you anything? Edit text? Jason will probably say, yeah, that's my experience. People, here, that's the bad things I hear all the day. I get an entry box, it says edit text. What am I supposed to do? We as sighted people, we can see that there's username written underneath. But the screen reader didn't actually say so.
Password edit text.
This one at least said password. But it's not actually asking for a password, it's asking for a PIN, which is sort of slightly different. So again, it's not really that useful.
Checkbox not checked.
Right, it's a checkbox. Now, what does that mean?
Username.
Okay, now I have to think. I've had 3 input elements. This relates to the first one?
PIN. Remember me.
Jason is probably clever enough because he has this all the time, but it's not the best user experience. And we want to give blind users the same user experience that we get. So this is, as you can see down here, is the markup that you get with this. So let's fix this. Let's make it properly accessible. So we've got a label here, and we'll relate that label to the, because it's for the use, it's for the first element, so we relate it to the element with the ID user. And you'll see what difference that makes.
Username PIN remember me. Edit text.
Ha, there you go. My fault.
Username edit text.
Yay, we can do something with it. Excellent. Well, I'll leave the rest to you. What happens after that is you just make your whole form accessible. You put the labels with the correct relationship to your input elements, and then it becomes accessible. So this is what you have to do. This is just to give you a little bit of a taste for the kind of stuff you need to do. Now, I actually want to introduce a systematic approach to you, something that will be useful for you as a web developer to make your apps accessible. What are the steps that you should be going through that will help you make your apps accessible? And so my recommendation is, first step is to use native elements as much as possible. And we'll get to that in a minute, what that means. Then make it keyboard accessible, and then screen reader accessible. So these are your 3 key steps to remember. What does that mean? Your native elements just means learn your HTML properly. Like learn all the awesome features that HTML provides, all the new features as well, article and section and so on, because they have actually a semantic meaning. And the screen reader can make use of that semantic meaning. The browser can make use of that semantic meaning to tell the screen reader something about it. So instead of using span with an on-click, we use a, so an anchor, a link with a href. So the browser knows, yeah, this is a link. It's not a generic span. And the same with div. Instead of divs, use a button. These are just some examples. But the consequences are really big, really, really big. If you have span and div, they're not focusable. That means they cannot be reached with the keyboard alone. You can't activate them with the keyboard. Also, there are no default key actions. You can't hit enter, you can't hit the space bar to activate them. At this moment, you don't even have to think as far as blind users. You just have to think of power users. Somebody who wants to use your application just from the keyboard. They can't use it either. So actually, you're going to make this whole application much more usable if you focus on making it using native elements, because they provide all of these things for free. And at the bottom, what I've mentioned here as well, it's also the styling. Your styling will completely be fixed. You don't have to do so much CSS if you use the right native elements. So here's an example.
Custom button, click on this button, send, clickable.
Right, it knows it's clickable because it's got an on-click, but you can see that it highlighted the whole thing as one thing because it's text. It's plain text for it, so it read the whole thing in one go. And if I start trying to hit enter, doesn't work. Like if I hit, that's now my slides that make a change, but I can't activate it with the space bar. I can't do anything on this because it's a div, it's not a button. So now let's change that element to a button. Not make the same mistake again. Here we go.
Custom button, click on this button. Send button.
See how we've got a focus ring around it? That means it's focusable. Because it's now a button, it can actually get, it's identified as a separate element, it gets the focus, and I can hit enter on it, just with the screen, with the keyboard, and it works. Simple as that.
Send button.
Now the next step after looking at all the elements that you have on your page and trying to make them HTML5 semantic elements, you can only go that far with it. There's some elements that you have custom created. There's some really cool controls that you might have developed. There's no native elements in HTML5 for it. What do? Now, you can do all of these things that the native controls do. You can simulate them with JavaScript and with other functions. So you need to do that actually to make it keyboard accessible. So the best thing to do there is just unplug your mouse and try and use your application only with the tab and the enter keys. Tab and enter, that's all we're going to use. You can keep your eyes open for now, so we're not going to worry too much about what the screen reader says, but we just want to be able to reach the interactive elements. So the key questions that we ask ourselves is, can you reach all the interactive elements with tab? Can you activate them with the enter key? Is your DOM order correct? So does it go through, the tab go through in the right order? And do you get the focus on the right elements? Each one of these, I have a little example.
Can you reach all interactive? Click on this link. Clickable.
Right, here we have a link. And let's assume this is something custom that you can't actually do with a anchor element, with an A element. So what do? We add tab index 0 in this instance just to make it part of a focusable tab order. So that just has made this.
Refresh. Click on this link.
Accessible.
Refresh. Click on this. Can you reach? Click on this. Refresh. Click on this link. Clickable.
Didn't quite do what I expected. Anyway, it should just turn that into a single element that I can reach with the tab order. Did I save it?
Refresh. Click on this link. Clickable.
Let's move on. Right, so as soon as we've made our element reachable, we now also want it to be able to activate with the enter key. In order to activate with the enter key, we need to put key handling behind it, like event handling. In this instance,
can you click on this link? Click refresh button.
In this instance, we need to add a onKey down handler. And I've already written the JavaScript function down there, which says handle key. It gets an event, and as part of the event, there's a key code for the key that's been pressed. I'm only interested in key number 13, which is the enter key. And when I hit the enter key, I'm actually going to just activate the onClick handler. So I don't have to write any new handlers. I'm just going to pass that through, right through to the onClick handler. Handle key, event, and now
add on key, refresh, click on this link, clickable.
This is the thing with the tab index. I don't know why it's not going there.
Refresh, click on this link, clickable.
I promise yesterday when I tested it, it worked. Anyway, in theory, I should be able to click on it, to just hit the...
Clickable.
To hit the enter key, I just hit the mouse key just to show you what happens. But it should do exactly the same thing.
Clickable.
Oh, now I've got focus. And I can hit the enter key.
Clickable. Refresh.
Oh, I'm a bit stupid. I'm sorry. We put the tab index in, so of course I need to use tab, not the screen reader.
Refresh button. Clickable.
That's to show you that it works on the other slide as well. Here we go.
Clickable.
Okay, so we've done tab index, which means we've made elements reachable with the tab key. tab and enter is what we care about, just to recapitulate. So now we've got a certain DOM order here. And in this one,
Edit text.
You'll see that first name comes first.
Edit text.
Then goes to address,
Edit
then to
text.
last name,
Edit
then to
text.
city. How often have you gone to a form and tried to tap through it, and it's driven you crazy because it jumped all over the place to the wrong elements, because that's the way that the DOM order was created, rather than the logical way, first name, last name, should be next to each other. So we're going to fix that here, and you probably already know how to do that, but it's fairly simple. You give an explicit tab order. Now, in this case, you can't use tab index equals 0, because tab index equals 0 will still retain the tab order in DOM order, so in the way that it's written in your code. But you can overcome that by giving it tab index explicit numbers, let's say a 10, and then we do last name next as tab index equals 20. I'm using 10, 20 and not 1, 2, so you're a bit more flexible. You can later push other elements in between them. Tab index equals 30, and down at the city we do tab index equals 40. So now what happens?
Edit text.
That's the first name.
Edit text.
And the next tab goes to last name. So we're actually
Edit
getting
text.
it in
text.
the right order. So I use tab index to fix these things. Still not real magic. You probably all know about it, but you've probably never built the bridge between tab index being important for accessibility. So now the last thing to get it keyboard accessible is, do you have your focus right? Is your focus on the right things when something custom opens? So here we've got an example with a
Edit text. Open pop-up button.
With a pop-up. I'm hitting the pop-up with the Enter key. Right, so my focus is now still on the open pop-up button. But really, I should be in the pop-up. If I hit Tab now,
Edit text.
I'm getting to everything else on the page first, because my pop-up in the DOM order is at the bottom of my page. That's not very helpful, so I have to tap through everything else before I reach this pop-up. That's one of the big pain points of people using screen readers. They will have to go, when you open up a pop-up, they will have to go and find where in your DOM on that page this thing is, because it might be anywhere on the page. To us visually, it's on top, and it's obvious that we can mouse onto it and click onto it. If you can't see it visually, you're basically lost as to where it is. So let's fix that. And all we need to do is to actually manage the focus by hand. And I'm just going to copy this into our display pop-up function. So the display pop-up function is the on-click handler for the button. I've also made that, because it's an on-click handler on a button element, the browser actually knows also to open it with the Enter key. It's a button, so that's by default activation in the event system. So now we've made it such that not only do we display it, so display the pop-up as a block, but we also put the focus on the OK button inside the pop-up. So what happens now?
Edit text. Open pop-up button.
Right, I hit Enter.
OK button.
Yay, and our focus is exactly where it's supposed to be. It's on the OK button, and we can just hit Enter, and it's done. So manage your focus, not just your tab order. Okay, that wasn't that hard, and we've already reached keyboard accessibility. If nothing else, take this home. This is really important. Just take home these few little things that I've done this far, and make your application keyboard accessible. Helps your power users, helps the screen readers. And why is this important? The screen readers can now reach these controls as individual elements, and the screen reader can activate the controls because there are events behind it. We're not quite ready, though, for screen reader accessibility. As we've heard before at the first test, what the screen reader reads out is also very important, what it reads out at what point. And there are a few things that we need to add to make that semantic, to provide that semantic information through through to the screen reader, things that we only see visually. Here's another
3.
example.
Now you need cement wood. You like a cookie? Question mark. Checkbox not checked. Check.
Yes, this kind of thing is what we want. We want the screen reader to tell us what is the information that's behind such elements. So what are the issues we need to fix? First of all, we need to look at the DOM order. Are we actually doing the right thing? Is the stuff in the right order? So because the screen reader will go through by DOM order, not by visual order, we may have screwed up something for the screen reader. Then is the role correct? The role that we give to an element will determine what functionality is behind it and what the screen reader reads out. Role, states, and properties, they're all from ARIA, so we'll go into those. Why ARIA is accessible interface, accessible rich internet applications. They help us through additional attributes to make our application screen reader accessible. And finally, of course, the labels. That takes us 360 degrees back to where we started originally. So let's do some of this stuff. Here's a bad DOM order example.
Example, bad DOM order.
Okay, close your eyes now.
The plane in rain stays mainly in the Spain.
Okay, that was pretty awful, wasn't it? Like the text is correct, but what it read was completely wrong. That's because we've done some trickery on that text. It looks as though it's in the right order, but we've manually positioned the spans in different locations. That totally screws with the screen reader. So let's not do that. ARIA helps us with roles, states, and properties to make fixes to what's being read out. One thing to understand about ARIA, though, is like we can provide these attributes, but we actually have to make the changes to the attributes ourselves in JavaScript. It's not something that happens automatically. There's no magic behind ARIA. It's all manual labor that we have to do in JavaScript ourselves. So that's a little bit of an annoying extra task, but we have to do that because only we, as the application developer, know the semantics. The browser can't just guess it. So let's give it this possibility. Let's do all this work. So for roles, we use the ARIA role attribute to indicate that a generic tag is playing the role of a standard widget. In this case, it's a button. I've got this example on the next page. I also want to point out there are other roles than button. There is the role of menu, menu item, and many others. So when you develop a custom element, a custom interactive element, go through your ARIA roles and pick one that will react in roughly the right way for what you're trying to do. So in this example, we have a div here.
Example menu.
A div here that just says menu, but it's actually a button. In our application, it takes the role of a button, so why not give it the role of a button?
Refresh menu button.
So if I give it the role button, the screen reader knows, okay, this is a role of button, so we're going to tell the screen reader that this is actually a button.
Exec menu button.
Menu button. Excellent. Don't need to do anything else. States. ARIA states are there to keep track of a state of an interaction. Sometimes we have something clicked, sometimes we have something popped up. There is some state changes that happen. The screen reader can't magically know about those either, therefore we have some attributes that help us do that. For example, if we have something that expands, it could be like a little plus icon on a list. Sometimes we want it collapsed and sometimes expanded, so use ARIA expanded for that. Or we have, as in the second example, we have ARIA checked to keep track of what is activated in a list of elements. I've got that as an example here for you. So we've got a list of elements here, left, center, right. The first one is activated, which we demonstrate by putting a red color behind it. And if we have, if we use ARIA checked like it is here, the screen reader will actually tell us this.
Example, adding ARIA states, menu, left, menu item checked 1 of 3.
Checked. Did you hear that? Menu item checked.
Center, menu item not checked 2 of 3.
Not checked.
Left, menu item checked 1 of 3.
Menu item checked 1 of 3. It even tells us how many there are in the list. So it's pretty
Center,
cool.
menu item not checked 2 of 3. Right, menu item not checked 3 of 3.
Excellent. We get all 3. We know what they are. There are 3 in a list. We know which element we're on, and we know which one is checked. What more can we ask for? And finally, the third thing that we get from ARIA, properties, a description of properties. Like the first example here is an element that has a pop-up. So we have an actual element, an attribute that's called ARIA has pop-up, and we can tell it whether it has a pop-up or not. Sometimes we dynamically create a pop-up for an element, so we might want to dynamically update this. But yes, this is the way to tell it that it has a pop-up. ARIA active descendant. Now, sometimes we have a list of items, and one of them is active, and we can use ARIA active descendant to position the active element in there. So I've got that as an example. Which one do I have? The pop-up one. Okay, here we go.
Example, adding ARIA properties, normal speed button.
So this one had ARIA has pop-up false, so let's set it to true and see what happens.
Refresh, normal speed button has popped up.
Chromevox has a bit of a funny reading of has pop-up. It says has pop-up.
Normal speed button has popped up.
There you go, pop-up. I don't know why, but that's what it does. But if you understand Chromevox, then yes, you know now that it has a pop-up and you can click it. So the final thing for screen readers is the right labeling. And we have 3 different ways of providing labels. One is the label element on which relates for form input elements. We've done that before, so I won't go further into that. You probably also know that there's alt attributes on images. When asked about accessibility, people go, yeah, I need to put alt attributes on my images, and they think that's all they need to do. Well, it's a bit more than that. But alt attributes are indeed important. Be careful though, we actually want 2 different types of alt attributes. We want those that have a description, for those images that have actual important content, and we have decorative images that just make our website look pretty, which a blind person really doesn't care about. So those pretty looking images, we don't need to describe. But we still need to put an alt attribute on it. We need to put an empty alt attribute in it so that the screen reader knows to ignore this element because it has no semantic content. So be careful about putting your alt attributes on all of your images and giving descriptions or no descriptions depending on whether they are decorative or not. And finally, for all the other elements, we've got ARIA label. And ARIA label, you can give it any kind of text to describe what this thing does. Here is now my full-blown pull-up menu with ARIA support and keyboard support and everything. I've got a little custom-made menu here, which I actually used as an example at a recent Google Developer Day. I don't want to go through how we develop this. You can check that out yourself. There's a link behind the title here to go to it. But this is the outcome of it. And as you can see, this menu is done with divs and with the UL list and with a few functions that set specific ARIA elements. So what happens when we...
Accessible web apps.
Oops, I clicked the link, unfortunately.
Developing accessible web apps. How hard can example pull-up menu with ARIA link?
Okay, now the next thing is the actual element.
Normal speed button has popped up.
Right, we know we are on a button and it has a pop-up. So as we are on a button and it has a pop-up, let's see the enter key should do something.
Normal speed menu 2 of 3.
Right, we've now got a menu open and we're on the second element of 3. So let's see what's in this menu.
Double speed 1 of 3. Normal speed 2 of 3. Half speed 3 of 3.
Right, so we've just gone with the up and down arrows through this menu. We know what's in it, and we can now use the enter key to select something. Let's see, we want double
Normal speed 2, double speed 1 of 3.
Enter.
Double speed button has popped up.
So now we've selected double speed and the menu has reset itself to double speed. So this is a custom control that I've just made accessible in exactly the same steps that I've just explained, that what you need to do to make an interactive element accessible. Was that so hard? Was it hard? People think accessibility is hard. I guess it is hard if you've never tried it, but I think with all the different functionalities that ARIA provides us with a bit of tab order, with a bit of focus, it's not that hard. It might be a bit of effort, but it's not hard, really. So, recap. What do we do in order to make a web application accessible? We want to use native HTML tags instead of divs and spans. We want to make sure that our DOM structure is sensible. We want to make sure that we can reach everything with the keyboard. We want to implement intuitive focus management. Don't forget your labels on controls and images, and include ARIA for screen readers. And that's it. Right, just one final piece of advice. We've actually developed some tools at Google that help. Chromevox, you've already seen, this is just a screen reader in the browser. Chromevox isn't actually all that useful for an actual blind person because they need a screen reader for everything they do on the platform, unless you're obviously using Chrome OS where it's the only screen reader you have. But as a development tool in your browser, I think it's really useful. Then we've also got Chrome Shades, which we've developed. Chrome Shades is a tool that removes all your styling and everything from your web page that a screen reader wouldn't see either. So you actually get to see your web page in exactly the same way that a screen reader sees it, which can help you a lot to find out where your problems are. And I'm just going to jump over this. There's just some links to helpful JavaScript libraries and screen readers that you can use. But Alice is now going to dig into the internals of assistive technology. Thank you.
Cool. All right, so I've got 5 minutes. All right, so building an accessible web browser, there's pretty much 2 ways you can do it. You can do it using accessibility APIs, which interface with the platform screen readers, or you can take a DIY approach, which is somewhat like Chromevox. So the DIY approach, just very briefly, Chromevox, which Sylvia has been using, is an example of that. There's pros and cons. Firefox was a predecessor of Chromevox as well. Pros and cons are you can make it very tailored to the web. So Chromevox is one of the most sophisticated screen readers for a web page because they have absolute control. It's very lightweight. It runs as a browser extension, and yeah, very, very usable and can be updated very quickly. However, most browsers use a platform accessibility API because then you can target lots of different screen readers. You can integrate with the screen reader that the user will be using in their day-to-day tasks as well. So yeah, this is like pretty much every major screen reader does this. So, okay, accessibility APIs, programmatic view of user interface elements and events of an application. So any application which is accessible can use these accessibility APIs. You can do this, or you can do the DIY approach, which is called self-voicing. But for most applications, this is absolutely sufficient. So this is just an example of mapping the DOM onto the accessibility APIs. So on the left, we have a DOM structure, which I'll actually demonstrate later. And on the right, we have when we put the focus on this button, you can see that it's created this accessibility hierarchy, which mimics the DOM hierarchy. Okay, so there's lots of different screen readers that you can use. So we've got JAWS, NVDA, Chromevox, which is, again, not using the accessibility APIs, Orca, which is the GNOME screen reader, VoiceOver, which is built into Mac. And depending on your choice of platform, you'll have different choice of screen readers, and they'll use a different accessibility API. So we've got the bit of matrix here of the different APIs. So ATK, ATSPI, actually, I'll get to them in detail on my next slide. All right, so we've got ATK/ATSPI. So ATK is Accessibility Toolkit. ATSPI is Assistive Technology Service Provider Interface, which I've now remembered since I've got it on Monday. This is just the very high-level architecture diagram that I made. So ATK is sort of a bit of a wrapper API around ATSPI, which is very low level. ATSPI also encompasses the accessibility broker, which runs as a daemon on the platform. applications register with that daemon. The accessibility technology then goes to the broker and says, what are the applications that are running. Then it can go talk to the application, get its accessibility hierarchy. So this ATK object has this parent-child hierarchy idea. So it can get the hierarchy, get notified when things change, when events happen, and also send notifications of user actions that happen via the assistive technology. Actually, one thing that reminds me of is another benefit of using accessibility APIs rather than a DIY approach is that then targets any accessibility technology which uses that API. So for example, voice actions can use the exact same API as the screen readers. So you can have a user who can't type for whatever reason, if they're paralyzed or whatever, can actually use that exact same action API to interact with the application, even if they are perfectly sighted. All right, so next API is MSAA and iAccessible 2. So MSAA was originally developed by Microsoft and released as an add-on to Windows 95. It's a proprietary standard. iAccessible 2 was developed by IBM to build on that standard to sort of acknowledge the fact that applications have come a long way since 1997. They're a lot more sophisticated, a lot more complicated. Came out in 2006. It was handed over to the Linux Foundation as an open standard. So the basic idea, I don't really understand that well, but you have this OLIAC DLL that manages the communication between the MSAA server. So the term server is used for the application in that it is serving UI information to the accessibility technology. And then you have communication via that. All right, and NS Accessibility is the Mac version. It's built into OS X. It defines methods, so it defines the interface that applications have to implement to interface with screen readers. So yes, that's built into the operating system, so it's all just there to access. All right, so because in the talk abstract we said we'd go into the browser internals, I made a diagram, but we don't really have a lot of time, and I don't think anyone's really that interested. So unless anyone screams at me to actually explain this slide, I'm going to skip right over it. Cool. All right, so if you're building an accessible application, you need to debug it, and each platform has its own accessibility inspector, which is actually quite fun. Believe it or not. So on GNOME, there's something called Accessizer. So if you just apt-get install Accessizer, you can use this on Linux. It's pretty good. I'm going to demo the built-in one on OS X, which is Accessibility Inspector, because it's just way easy to use. So I've got WebKit running. I'm going to start in Accessibility Inspector. And what that lets me do is, so this is where the ARIA comes into it. So when we're mapping, as browser developers, when we're mapping the DOM onto the accessibility APIs, we're going to use the ARIA data to aid in that. So if you have this thing, which is a button, which is actually a div, that will allow us to map it onto a button rather than just a section. So that's how that works. So yeah, if I mouse over the button, you can see that the accessibility inspector is now telling me that's a button within an application. So this is, again, it's an ARIA role called application, within an application, within content, within, and so on of the hierarchy. So that's a very brief example of how it works. I was going to give you a demo of something which shows the notifications, but I couldn't get it to build. But a colleague of mine made this really cool extension to this, which actually shows all the notifications that are going as well. All right, so that is accessibility inspectors. And yeah, so now Sylvie is just going to very quickly talk about what's going on currently, and then we'll take questions.
I just wanted to add, what Alice just demonstrated is really cool because it's sort of the Firebug of accessibility. Because like how you're using Firebug to inspect what your web page is doing, you can use the inspectors to see what your accessibility stuff does. So don't underestimate the value of these accessibility inspectors. Right, and I'm just not going to say much because we don't really have much time and we won't give you a chance to ask some questions. What's happening right now is that ARIA and HTML5 get further integrated. There's still a lot of issues that need to be sorted out, little things on, mostly it works in browsers, but there are some things that haven't been sorted out. And the other big thing that's happening in accessibility around standards is video accessibility. I gave a talk at the Multimedia Mini conference on Monday about that. Basically, what's happening there is we've got specifications for captions and audio descriptions, and also ways to synchronize sign language video with video. So that's happening, and browsers are implementing it, which is very exciting. Just a page with some links to some of the Google accessibility stuff that's happening, and we'll leave it at that. And if somebody has any questions, feel free to ask them now. We've got a microphone here.
So has anybody got any questions? Put your hand up.
Sylvia, towards the start of your talk, you had like an example of the pop-up with a button giving the OK button focus. I was wondering, like normally pop-ups are like some kind of message like, say in an email program, are you sure you want to delete your entire inbox or something like that?
Yeah.
Would you normally give focus, or not focus, but how would you do it so that you could get the message read by the screen reader, then give the OK or cancel button focus? Like, so the pop-up has...
Put the focus on the pop-up, not on the button. So if you put the focus on the pop-up, then the screen reader will be on the pop-up, and the first thing it'll read will be whatever is inside that pop-up.
And then you could move it on to the OK or cancel button.
The screen reader people know how to move down from there.
That implies that the pop-up has to have a tab index.
Yes, the pop-up needs to have a tab index. At minimum, it needs to have a tab index of -1, which means that you can put the focus onto it, but you won't be able to reach it with your normal tab interaction. So tab index -1 is actually quite useful to allow you to programmatically set focus on an element, even though it's not in your normal tab order.
Oh, cool, thanks.
Okay?
Thank you very much for that. Has anybody else got any questions? None, really? Okay, well, I just want to take this time to... One right
There's one up there.
Okay.
Do we have time for it?
Mine's just a short question. With regards to some of these custom widgets and so on, I've been getting into a bit of using tools like Dojo and jQuery. How are these normally for web accessibility?
Yeah, so I think the question was, how are the JavaScript libraries that people use, how do they fare with respect to accessibility? Was that the question? So I've made this list here, or we've made this list here, with 3 JavaScript libraries that have actually pretty good accessibility support. So they will help you set the right attributes on the diverse elements. So make use of those and make sure to fill in the attributes that are related to screen readers and stuff that they provide.
They're also good as a reference for how to use the various ARIA states and properties and things.
They're pretty good, yeah. Okay, any more questions? Who here? Oh, there's another one. By the way, who here has been trying to make their web pages accessible? Just a show of hand. Who here has been frustrated by it? Probably all these people. It is actually quite complicated to understand at first, but once you understand what process you have to go through, I think it becomes fairly clear and not trivial, but it's also not like the most complicated thing in the world to do. Yeah. Okay, so there was one more question.
Is there any tool that we can just run our page through just to tell us what's wrong rather than testing? You know, like we can just turn off the mouse, but it'd be nice if it just pointed out. Oh no, sorry, if you covered it.
Right, are there any tools that help us with development? Yes, that's one of the big things actually. I think we could do much better with tools. Like there are not enough tools out there to help web developers make their web pages accessible. It would be nice if there was a tool that just went through your web page and said, okay, you've got all of these elements that all miss out on a tab index. Go and fix that. But unfortunately, there's a lot of semantic information in applications as well that only you as the web developer know. So it's not possible to totally automate it, but there's some tools that help you. I pointed out 2 before.
There's also an extension for Firebug, and it's Accessibility Inspector. I have not got it to work yet. If anyone has, good on you, let me know how. And yeah, as Sylvia was saying, it's a bit like the problem of usability versus correctness. Well, you knew both of those things, but simply ensuring that your page is correctly coded in HTML won't ensure that it's usable. So you've got to go through and do the analysis and like work out what needs to be made accessible and things like that before you can't just completely mechanically verify it.
Yeah. Just try it out with Chrome Vox, load it in your browser and try and read it through, and you'll immediately see a few things that will be broken, a few important things, elements that can't be reached. They're the most important ones. If there's elements on your page that can't be reached, And in particular, if that's the login button somewhere on your page where people can log into your application to actually be able to use it properly, that's really, really bad, because you've basically excluded all of these people from being able to use to sign up to your service, which, yeah, this is really not useful.
Any more questions?
We'll be putting
can I
that.
get everyone to give our wonderful speakers a hand? Thank you very much.
We'll be putting the slides up online so you can read up on stuff as well. Hopefully it helps. Thanks.
Okay, now on behalf of the conference team, I would like to present you two with presents.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.